and in many cases it's not the government that's doing it, it's people that kill them and then take their land, and nothing happens to them.
May 21st, 2025. Trump accused South Africa of genocide. But was it justice he's defending or power he's trying to protect? Why did a US president confront Cyril Ramaphosa, who was his guest? And what did Ramaphosa say in return? Let's find out. Trump's accusation wasn't new. It was recycled. But when he looked Cyril Ramaphosa in the eye and declared that white South African farmers were being hunted, he was doing more than repeating a conspiracy theory. He was invoking a centuries-old weapon, fear of the black uprising. The phrase white genocide didn't originate in South Africa. It was forged in far-right American and European circles as a rhetorical shield, meant not to describe reality, but to protect power. For decades, it sat dormant on neo-Nazi message boards, far-right newsletters, and fringe YouTube channels. Then, in the 2010s, it mutated into a kind of pseudo-statistical folklore, carefully curated farm attack lists, dramatic visuals of burning homesteads, and funeral footage stripped of context. But the myth didn't catch fire because of facts. It caught fire because it told a comforting lie to a global white audience: you are being replaced. That myth was imported into South Africa and re-exported to the West under the guise of humanitarian concern. For years, politicians like Australia's Peter Dutton called for emergency visas for white South Africans. In the US, Fox News ran stories framing South Africa as a post-apartheid wasteland. And then came Trump, who mainstreamed the myth by tweeting that he'd asked the State Department to investigate land seizures and killing of farmers. No mass killing was ever found. No policy of racial extermination has ever been confirmed. But the lie endured. Why? Because it serves a purpose. Not in South Africa, but abroad. In the global right-wing imagination, South Africa is the cautionary tale of what happens when power shifts hands. When colonizers lose control. When the oppressed write new rules. It's not the violence they fear, it's justice. And so they recast justice as vengeance. White farmers in South Africa do face dangers. But so do black farm workers. So do police officers, school teachers, and rural laborers. South Africa's crime crisis is indiscriminate and overwhelmingly internal.
Nothing happens to
There
them.
is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately through criminal activity, are not only white people. Majority of them are black people.
According to SAP's data, most murders occur within communities, not across racial lines. Black South Africans are more likely to be killed, yet their stories never make it to Trump's desk. That's what makes the myth so dangerous. It's selective grief, not universal empathy. It doesn't want South Africa to be safer. It wants white South Africans to remain separate and above the struggle. And for those who push this myth, there is always a second act. The story doesn't end with fear, it ends with land. Because if the world can be convinced that white farmers are being targeted, then suddenly any attempt to redistribute land becomes persecution. Any constitutional reform becomes a threat. And that's the trap Ramaphosa refused to walk into. Once the myth of a white genocide takes root, it poisons the perception of everything that follows. That's exactly why Trump invoked it, to cast a shadow over South Africa's land reform, not as restitution, but as racial revenge. But to see land reform this way is to erase the very history that made it necessary. In South Africa, land is not just a commodity. It's a memory carved into terrain. It's a birthright denied through ink and bullets. Colonial conquest began with land dispossession. Apartheid codified it into law. By the time Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, less than 13% of the land was in black hands, despite black South Africans making up over 80% of the population. This was not just an injustice, it was theft on a national scale. Yet post-apartheid South Africa didn't opt for revenge, it opted for reconciliation. The initial plan was a willing buyer, willing seller model, a voluntary land sale approach meant to avoid disruption. But decades later, only a fraction of the land had changed hands. Why? Because landowners weren't willing, and the government often didn't have the resources to buy at inflated prices. Black South Africans, watching freedom stall at the gates of white-owned farms, began to ask, what kind of freedom is this, if we're still locked out of the soil we came from? That question became a demand, and that demand became policy. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. In 2023, the South African Parliament passed a land expropriation amendment allowing the state to redistribute land under specific lawful conditions, even without compensation in some cases, particularly where land was abandoned, unused, or acquired through illegitimate historical means. This wasn't a lawless seizure. It was a constitutional process, debated for years, with strict criteria and judicial oversight. But to Trump and those who echo him, none of that mattered. To them, any shift in ownership was theft. Any loss of exclusivity was tyranny. And any policy that rebalanced history was an attack on whiteness itself. The irony? Many white farmers in South Africa didn't share this paranoia. Organizations like AgriSA publicly endorsed parts of the land reform process, recognizing that sustainable farming cannot exist on stolen foundations. They knew that unresolved injustice breeds instability, and that the future of agriculture depends on shared prosperity, not fear-mongering from abroad. What Trump chose to ignore is that land reform isn't a black versus white issue. It's a justice versus inertia issue. South Africa's soil holds the bones of ancestors who were driven off it, the sweat of laborers who were never paid for it, and the silent weight of history still unspoken in many farmhouses. Redistribution isn't about erasure, it's about repair. Yet, every time someone calls it a land grab, they erase the centuries when the grabbing was done by the powerful with muskets and mining licenses. What South Africa is doing now is not retaliation, it is responsibility. And that's what Cyril Ramaphosa tried to explain in that room. Land reform is not about vengeance. It's about restoring dignity, balance, and belonging. But Trump didn't come to listen. He came to accuse.
We were taught by Nelson Mandela that whenever there are problems, people need to sit down around a table and talk about them.
Well, there are problems.
And this is precisely what we would also like to talk about, including, of course, trade matters, investment matters. So the issues that concern you as the United States,
those are all recent. Those are all deaths.
Yeah, in many ways, I mean, one should say you are a partner of South Africa, and you are raising concerns, and these are concerns that we are willing to talk to you about.
So, how do you respond to a man who trades in theater, not truth? You don't match his performance, you dismantle it. After Trump tried to reframe land justice as racial revenge, the conversation should have collapsed into chaos. But it didn't, because Cyril Ramaphosa didn't take the bait. The difference between the two men wasn't just ideological, it was theatrical. Trump, a master of political stagecraft, brought props, reports, video clips, a stack of articles with cherry-picked headlines, a cross-heavy video montage implying mass murder, a brief clip of Julius Malema chanting a controversial anti-apartheid song. He delivered it all with the rehearsed cadence of a man who knows his audience is not the person across from him, but the cameras he believes are always watching.
But we are starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness. Shoot to kill Yamasa. Kill the brewer, the farmer. Kill the brewer, the farmer. Pa, pa, pa. Shoot to kill Yamasa. Kill the brewer, the farmer. Kill the brewer, the farmer. Pa, pa,
But Ramaphosa, a former trade unionist and seasoned negotiator, understood something deeper. Power is not in volume, it's in precision. So he waited. He listened. Then, calmly, he began dismantling the theater, piece by piece. First, the video. Ramaphosa clarified that the crosses were not mass graves. Next, the land accusations. Ramaphosa didn't revisit the policy details. He didn't need to. Instead, He emphasized a truth that can't be disputed. South Africa's constitution remains the guiding force in every reform effort. No land is taken without due process. No citizen is outside the law. If land was the weapon of apartheid, he said, then fair reform is the antidote, not its inverse. But the moment that silenced even Trump's performance was what Ramaphosa didn't say. He didn't respond to the accusation with anger. He didn't refute the song with defensiveness. He didn't accuse America of its own unresolved land theft or systemic violence, though he easily could have. Because Ramaphosa understood the stakes weren't just political, they were psychological. Trump came into the room hoping to dominate the stage, but he left without control of the narrative. Ramaphosa didn't win the argument through rhetoric. He won it by refusing to descend into it. This moment mattered more than people realize. In a world of reactionary politics, where sound bites replace statecraft and outrage is monetized, Ramaphosa's restraint was a form of resistance. It was proof that African leadership doesn't have to match Western drama to command respect. It can stand on its own, calm, deliberate, unshaken. That's why the Oval Office encounter was more than a disagreement. It was a clash of leadership cultures. One man flailed with fear, searching for proof of victimhood. The other stood grounded in sovereignty, offering a lesson in emotional discipline. And in doing so, Ramaphosa exposed the performative nature of Trump's concern. If this was truly about saving lives, then where was Trump when South African miners were gunned down by police in Marikana? Where was he when townships exploded from a lack of sanitation or electricity? His outrage had a very specific shade, and Ramaphosa's calm illuminated it. But this isn't just about one meeting or two men. The implications ripple far beyond Washington. Because when a U.S. president builds foreign policy on misinformation, it affects aid, investment, immigration, and perception. It affects who gets empathy and who gets ignored. Which is why the question now isn't whether Ramaphosa defended his nation well. It's why he had to in the first place. Why is selective outrage treated as a global crisis, while African trauma is dismissed as background noise? If Trump's outburst in the Oval Office was meant to protect white South Africans, the question isn't what South Africa is doing wrong. It's why America suddenly cares so much. And the answer doesn't lie in the fields of Limpopo. It lies in the subconscious terrain of American politics. Because this wasn't really about South Africa. It never is. The moment Trump began speaking about white genocide, it became clear this was a performance for an American audience. A dog whistle rebranded as foreign policy. And when he dramatized the plight of white farmers, it wasn't humanitarianism, it was projection. A desperate effort to reposition whiteness as endangered, victimized, under siege. And this tactic isn't new. From Rhodesia to South Africa, Western powers have long clung to settler outposts in Africa as moral proxies. When colonial control slipped, the narrative shifted, from civilizing the continent to saving the settlers. In the 1980s, anti-apartheid activists were smeared in U.S. media as radicals. By the 2000s, land reform in Zimbabwe became the cautionary tale for investors and foreign governments who feared losing their foothold in Africa. And now, with Trump reintroducing this narrative through the lens of South Africa, the pattern repeats. The African is recast not as a citizen, but as a threat. The white presence is recast not as a relic of conquest, but as a fragile minority in need of protection. Its history turned inside out to serve political nostalgia. So why does this matter now? Because Trump, facing his internal reckoning in the U.S., found in South Africa a stage to reassert a dying worldview. One where whiteness is purity, loss is persecution, and justice is a conspiracy. His base, fueled by anxieties about demographic shifts, immigration, and reparations, doesn't need statistics. They need symbols. And Trump gave them one: the white farmer, surrounded, outnumbered, forgotten by the world. But here's the hypocrisy. If Trump truly cared about safety in South Africa, where was his voice when black South Africans were protesting the lack of water in rural provinces? When school children died in overcrowded, unsafe classrooms? When women in informal settlements were found murdered month after month with no suspects charged? His silence reveals the truth. This isn't about concern. It's about control. Control of the narrative. Control of who counts as a victim. Control of what stories get told in Washington. And Ramaphosa exposed that, without theatrics, without insult, by simply refusing to entertain a lie dressed in concern.
One, that is not government policy. We have a multi-party democracy in South Africa that allows people to express themselves, political parties to adhere to various policies, and in many cases, or in some cases, those policies do not go along with government policy. Our government policy is completely against what.
But this also raises a deeper issue. What does it mean for African nations when the West's empathy is racially conditional? When outrage is reserved for one demographic while the suffering of millions is treated as too complex or internal? The selective outrage hurts more than pride. It shapes policy. It determines what aid gets cut, what sanctions are considered, what headlines make it to Western front pages. And for South Africa, it sends a dangerous message. Your sovereignty is negotiable if it disrupts our racial fantasies. And that is the tightrope modern African leaders must walk. They are expected to heal centuries of damage while staying polite to the very powers that caused it. Ramaphosa didn't lose his temper because he couldn't afford to. He had to represent more than a country. He had to represent a continent's right to reform, repair, and rise. So if Trump's Oval Office performance was about saving white farmers, the world should ask, who is saving South Africa from the narratives that keep it shackled? By the time Trump left the room on May 21, 2025, he had exhausted his playbook: shock, spectacle, and symbolic grief curated for cable news. But Cyril Ramaphosa had done something more radical. He hadn't just defended his country, he had reclaimed its narrative. This was never just about one confrontation in the Oval Office. It was about a deeper struggle over who gets to define South Africa. And for too long, that definition has been outsourced to Western think tanks, foreign journalists, and politicians like Trump, who look at African self-determination not as maturity, but as a threat to the old order. What Ramaphosa demonstrated, without slogans or shouting, was that South Africa no longer needs validation from former colonizers. Its policies are not on trial in Washington. Its future is not up for American approval. And its pain cannot be measured only when it bleeds white. The land reform debate, the false genocide narrative, and the external judgment all stem from the same refusal to let go of a worldview where Africa must remain apologetic for asserting itself. But South Africa has moved on. Slowly, unevenly, but decisively. It has survived the brutality of apartheid and the complexity of post-liberation governance. It has navigated inequality, corruption, protest, and reconciliation, all while maintaining the bones of one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. Its democracy is loud, messy, and alive. Its courts challenge power. Its people protest with the urgency of those who know that silence was once fatal. And most importantly, its government no longer flinches when accused by outsiders with selective memory and skewed morality. Ramaphosa's composure wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. It was the manifestation of a country that has been through worse storms and refuses to return to the old master-servant dynamic that once defined its relationship with the West. He wasn't performing for applause. He was performing a duty to history. That's the message the world missed in its obsession with Trump's theatrics. While headlines focused on the confrontation, they ignored what the confrontation revealed: that South Africa is no longer on the defensive. It is shaping its story, with or without American endorsement. And that story matters. Because in a world where misinformation travels faster than policy, where narratives can trigger sanctions or sway investment, African nations cannot afford to let others define them. Ramaphosa's stand wasn't just for South Africa. It was a reminder to the continent: own your story, or someone else will sell it back to you wrapped in fear.
You can take away land for no payment.
I want to clarify that, because we have a constitution. Our constitution guarantees and protects the sanctity of tenure of land ownership. And that constitution protects all South Africans with regard to land ownership. However, we do say, because we've got to deal with the past, the government, and as your government also has the right to expropriate land for public use.
And you're doing that.
And we've never really gotten underway with that.
From Accra to Lusaka to Harare, leaders are watching. They've seen what happens when policy reform is mislabeled as radicalism. They've seen how international concern is often a mask for geopolitical leverage. And they've seen how quickly empathy disappears when it no longer serves the West's strategic or racial interests. But now, they've also seen something else, a model of dignified resistance. South Africa didn't shout to be heard. It spoke with clarity. And in doing so, it reminded the world that African sovereignty isn't up for debate, not in tweets, not in newsrooms, and not even in the Oval Office. So the next time a foreign leader accuses, dramatizes, or distorts, perhaps they should be prepared. Because the new South Africa doesn't plead for approval. It doesn't shrink in the face of myth. It simply replies with truth and without apology. Because when a nation knows its worth, it doesn't argue with noise. It walks through it.
People are being executed, and in many cases, it's not the government that's doing it, it's people.
Do you think Trump should be open to listening to when he starts throwing accusations at a leader? Let us know in the comments section. Did the South African president handle the situation well? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.